This is the fourth Greenfoot tutorial for GCSE Computer Science. In the previous ones, we were able to cover and do the first 4 parts of the question. In this one, we're going to be covering how to add sounds, how to add the counter, but also get the counter to record, how many times we're removing something from the world, or how many times we're colliding with something. So the first thing to do is the adding the sound. Now we need to add the sound when the gate is removed, and this is fairly straightforward. We just need to go to exactly where the code is, where the gate's removed. It's in the athlete code, and add greenfoot.playSound. Now what we need to add into here is a string, and that has to actually contain the exact name of the sound file. So you'll be able to find that name by going into the folder and then going into sounds, and you can see that this file is called pop.wav. Now sometimes the .wav won't be shown because sometimes the computer will hide the extensions on there, but you can find out how to unhide the extensions if you need to, or just know that this is always a .wav file, so it's always going to end like that. Once you've done that, you can test to see if the sound plays, which it does, and we can move on to the next task. So the next task is connected with the counter. So having a look at the counter code, what we've got here is the public counter function, which is the constructor function. This is the function which is needed as soon as the counter is created. You can see that it's got a couple of parameters here. 0 is what's printed, 20 is the text size, color.white is the text color, and black is the background of the object. And you'll see how that ties in when we see it appear in the world. We've also got a function bump count, which adds a specific amount onto the total count, and this plus equals is the same as total count equals total count plus the amount. It's just easier to think about that way. The line at the bottom just changes how the counter looks. So we've got the total count being printed in that bottom line instead of obviously 0, which is the starting value. So how do we get at the moment the counter doesn't appear in the world. So our next step is to have that appear in the world. Everything is added to the world, which was shown I think in the first tutorial, in this code here, the ground code. So going into Open Editor, you can see where all the athletes, the 2 water traps and the gates are all added in Prepare. What we need to do is manually, this code was automatically generated. What we need to do is manually copy out the same format of this, but for the counter. So counter, I'm going to call it just C, because we can choose any name for that variable, and that is going to equal new counter, and then we need to add object counter to the world. So let's just type that. Now, when we add something to the world, we always need to say which location we're adding it to. I'm just going to add it to 0, 0, which is in the coordinate system that this uses. It's just the top left. They may vary that in the exam. They may say put it in the bottom right. But you'll just need to vary the coordinates. You can see now, as soon as I've compiled it, it's appeared there as 0, its starting value. Okay, so the next job is to actually be able to call this bump count function. Now we need to call this every single time we remove one of these gates from the world, and that happens in the athlete code. Okay, so and this is part F. So going into the athlete code, we need to obviously call the bump count function exactly where we've been kind of removing the object and playing this sound. The problem is we're not sure what to call the bump count function on, because at the moment the athlete doesn't actually have access to the counter, but we know we're going to have something dot bump count, and we're increasing it by 1 point, so we need to put 1 there. Okay, we're just not quite sure what the variable name is. Now we've got to the athlete has to have access to the counter, and so what we need to do is introduce a counter C into the constructor. This means that when the athlete is created, it is given the counter. We also need somewhere to store that inside the athlete function. We use a global variable, and I'm calling this global counter, along with all the other global variables you can see, which are obviously outside the functions. Now, when the athlete gets this counter, when it's created, it needs to store it as the global variable as global counter, and it's global counter that we call bump count on. So it needs to be global counter dot bump count. Now, at the moment, I'm not quite sure why. At the moment, we have no syntax errors. EDUQAS in their template seem to have public void athlete. Now this isn't, we can't have void in there because a constructor function can't actually have its return value. It's always just public athlete for if we're under the athlete code, or for instance the counter, we had public counter, for the counter code. So we need to remove that void. Now at the moment there's a bit of a conflict here. We've got athlete counter C here, which has a parameter counter C, but in the ground code we've got athlete and it doesn't have a parameter, and that's why it was giving that error connected with parameters. So this is where I need to give the counter to the athlete when it's created. So it's new athlete C, which is the name of the counter in this ground code. You can see there's no syntax errors in the ground code. There's no syntax errors in the athlete. So we can run and test this, and you can see it's increasing the counter as I collide with the gates there. You can see it's increased up to 2. So it's working correctly. So that was part F, which was increasing the counter. We're now on to part G, which is to edit the code so that the counter loses a point when the athlete collides with the water trap. Very, very similar code. We just need to edit code so it detects collisions with water traps. It's almost exactly the same as the collision with a gate, so I'm actually just going to copy that code there, and then I'm just going to edit it for the water trap. So let's copy all of this code, and let's edit it for the water trap. So instead of actor G, I'm just going to call it W. It's not going to be gate, it's going to be the water trap class. We don't need to remove the water traps, so we can get rid of anything removing it. We don't need to play sounds when we collide with the water traps, so we'll get rid of that. Instead of bumping count 1, which will obviously increase the counter, we need to effectively add -1 onto it. So we can just use -1 as that variable. It's still an integer, so that's absolutely fine. We've got no syntax errors. There is actually a mistake in the code. I've just forgotten to edit one thing. So you'll see that when I test it, even though I'm colliding with the water traps, the counter's not being decreased. See if you can have a quick look. That's where the mistake was. I'd forgotten to change that from G to W. Now when we test it, you're going to see this decrease, and you've got -2 there already. Okay, so always test after every part, just as I've been saying in the previous ones. So thank you for we've done all of these parts here. Thank you for listening to tutorial number 4, which is the final tutorial for Greenfoot Java, and I'll see you in videos on another topic. Thank you very much.